Listen up, fellow Democrats. Fight fake news and lies with facts. Save our democracy from right-wing hypocrisy. Keep our integrity, embrace our diversity. Whenever we're down, we always come back. So listen up, Democrats.
Hello, welcome to Progressive Oregon, a weekly engagement broadcast on progressive issues in Oregon. I am your host, Larry Taylor, and I'm with my co-host today, Betsy Cunningham. If you would like to ask questions during the live stream broadcast, you're more than welcome to type them into the chat window in YouTube, and Betsy will relay them to us, and we will do our best to answer them. On our show today, we'll briefly go over what's been happening over the past couple of weeks, and then we're going to spend some time talking about the delegate selection plan of the Democratic Party for the 2020 convention, which is going to be really important because if it's a brokered convention, who shows up in the room will determine who the candidate will be to run against the Republican candidate for president. Then we'll get an update on the Poor People's Campaign, and we'll briefly run through upcoming events. So what's been happening? The good news for the 56% of the Oregons who voted for progressive candidate in 2016. We are retooling for 2020. We have the Progressive Caucus now within the Democratic Party of Oregon. If anyone would like to join the Progressive Caucus, who's a delegate to the State Central Committee, please do so at pdpo.org, and we will pull you into the conversation and what we are doing to get organized. We have the parallel organization for people who are not State Central Committee members but are Democrats in Oregon but who would like to improve things. You can sign up at advancementofdemocracy.org, and we will get you pulled into those events. The big news that happened last weekend, which is why we didn't have a show, was that the Democratic Party of Oregon elected its officers for the next 2 years. All of these officers, except for the DNC members, decided not to run for re-election. And so this is the first time in decades where all the officers are new. Elected was Casey Hansen as chair. She's been a former chair of Multnomah County. We elected Pete Lee as first vice chair. Pete Lee showed up in 2016 and has been very active in campaigns and was a Bernie Sanders delegate to the convention in 2016. We have Michelle Risher, who's the second vice chair. She's been chair of the LGBTQ caucus of the Democratic Party. And then we had elected Eileen Keeley as secretary. So we'll see how things go from here. The other big news is Oregon for Bernie is cranking up. It's a statewide organization of people who are going to be working for Bernie Sanders in the 2020 election. We have identified 7 population hubs of activity where we want things to be going on. We will be having monthly statewide events beginning in April. If you would like to join, go to OregonForBernie.org. You can sign up to receive updates on events, or if you want to get more active, you can be a part of the movement and join the leadership. You can do that on the contact page. And then if you have a Bernie event to publicize whether or not you are associated with the group, we would be delighted to put that out there. And you can also log that on your on the contact page. We are going to be debuting a new show starting in about 2 weeks. So sometime in April, we will start a show called Parliamentary Talk. What we're going to do is a show that answers your questions about parliamentary procedure. It's going to do for parliamentary procedure what Car Talk did for car repair and what Dan Savage has done for sex. So we think it's going to be a really fun show. What we are collecting now is everyone's issues that they're having with whether it be a homeowner association or if it's your fraternity or your sorority or your town council or your county commission, whatever issues you have going on there, if they are parliamentary in nature and you have a problem, and especially if you're being screwed out of your rights, please submit them at parliamentarytalk.org, and then we will discuss them during the show and how you go about solving them. And then we will have a focus topic for each show where we do a deep dive into some aspect of parliamentary procedure that people don't understand. So please share your parliamentary issues with us so we can talk about them on the show. And if you'd like, we might even bring you in live to describe your situation for you. To our first big segment now is it's about unpacking the Democratic National Convention delegate selection rules. The process that they follow is that in 2019, or actually at the end of 2018, the National Democratic Party issued a set of guidelines for all the states to follow for the selection of their delegates to the convention. And if you watch the conventions in 2016, you notice there was a big difference between the Republican convention and the Democratic convention. The Republican convention was made up of basically older white couples, and the Democratic convention looked like the UN. It had everyone from all different backgrounds and identities. This was not an accident. It is an intentional effort by the Democratic Party to reach out to everybody and to be inclusive. And this really comes out of the rules. I was reading through the rules and preparing for this show, and they're a great set of rules, and they're being done with the best intentions. What happens is when those rules are now translated into the plans that each state develops. And so this is where you have to closely watch what your state is doing. In our state, we had the chair once again peel off part of the rules and assign them to a special ad hoc committee. This is actually not allowed in our bylaws. The convention rules are all owned by the Rules Committee, and she actually violated the state rules by doing this. And unfortunately, there's no one that we can go to make her adhere to the rules, and so it's really upon the conscience of the party itself to call her to order and make her do that. Otherwise, it's just an honor system. But that chair is gone, and hopefully the new chair will adhere better to the bylaws. And especially if something is going on in your party's implementation of the rules, this is where you need to go to the the national guidelines and verify what they're supposed to be doing, and then see how that's been translated into the state plan. And then if they're following the approved plan, then there's not much you can do. But if they're in violation, you can call them on it. And especially if they have, one of the ways that organizations get around enforcement is that they leave room for ambiguity, where then the leadership gets to translate and control what happens. These are the kinds of things that we discovered in the last set of rules from our state, which we will be patching up this next time. There should be no ambiguity, and what you find out is if you have a nice, clear plan that is developed in an open and transparent way, then you don't have discord within your party. There are 21 rules that comprise the specifications as laid out by the Democratic Party itself. So I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I'm going to talk about the ones that you might care about the most. Rule 1 is about how the rules for each state party's submission. There's rules about participation. There's rules about scheduling the delegate selection meetings. There's some talk about the open primary. Then there's several rules on non-discrimination and affirmative action. And this is where you get the outreach that the Democratic Party does to all the various groups. We'll be going through those specifically so you can understand what the Democratic Party will be talking. Then there's the rules around delegate apportionment. And then there's some special rules about other people that have sort of slots reserved for them. You want to make sure that this does not get abused. Then there's selection of delegate at large, which has always been a point of contention, certainly at the last convention, because those are also known as superdelegates. There's some rules about presidential preference, and then there's deadlines and quorum requirements and all that stuff that you don't need as long as everyone's playing by the rules, but you do need them when they start to violate it. There's a whole section on challenges. So if you find yourself really being screwed by a establishment party organization, there's ways you can challenge the seating of delegates at the convention itself. Going on to the next slide. So the delegate elections happen in two phases. The first phase is the congressional district elections, and the second phase is the statewide. And we'll be talking about these in more detail. It appears that our state, Oregon, is going to have a very compressed cycle for this because the primary is in the middle of May, and the delegate selection has to be completed by the beginning of June, which is going to be very tricky to accomplish. But the first phase is our delegates that are elected from each congressional district. So we currently have 5, so there will be five conventions for the selection of those, and that gives us geographic distribution around the state. And then the second phase is where the delegates elected from the first convention go to a statewide convention and elect the final set of delegates. And we'll go into the details of that when we talk to that section. So Rule 1, every state party shall provide for a 30-day period of public comment to solicit opinions on the state delegate selection plan, affirmative action plan, and outreach and inclusion plan. This is due on September 13th of 2019. Excuse me. In our state, they're just completing this portion of it right now, so we'll get a crack at it some time between Monday and the end of the month, I believe. And it must be available by October 1st. And what I'm doing is just hitting the salient points of these. There's some links that we'll talk about later if you actually want to read through the documents and get the details on it. Rule 2, which is the next slide, it just says that the participation in the convention is limited to Democrats, and it allows for internet voting, but there's a bunch of regulations on that as well. So if your state wants to tippy-toe into electing of delegates that are other than face-to-face, you need to watch this, because there's places in internet voting where things have to be done properly. Rule 3 calls for open and transparent delegate selection meetings. All good. As I said earlier, you have to have ethical leadership that with the intent of following the rules so that you actually can achieve these goals. Rule 4 calls for openness to all Democrats and bans discrimination. Lots of mom and apple pie stuff. Rules 5, 6, and 7 are where we get the affirmative action and details. So Rule 5 is about non-discrimination, and it calls for a program of effective affirmative action and inclusion. This means that the party cannot sit like a hidden priesthood. They really need to go out to where these various groups exist and reach out to them, not them coming to the Democratic Party. This is one of the problems why the Democratic Party tends to be so white and older, is because it's been run as a priesthood. But this is what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to pursue the following identities: race, sex, people of all ages, colors, creed, national origin, religion, ethnic identity, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, and economic status or disability. Rule 6 talks about affirmative action. It says national and state Democratic parties shall adopt and implement affirmative action programs with specific goals and timetables for, and this is where it boils down to the specifics, African Americans, Hispanics, Native Americans, Asian American and Pacific Islanders, and women. So what this means is that they will come up with specific goals in the affirmative action plan that they intend to meet. So when we look at who is ultimately elected to be the delegation from Oregon, we have representation from these various groups, at least equivalent to their statistical existence in the Democratic Party. Also on Rule 6 on the next slide, the goal shall be to achieve participation as indicated by their presence in the Democratic electorate. So this is what I was just saying. If we have 20% Black members of the Democratic Party, then there should be at least 20% of those slots filled by people who identify themselves as African American. And the next one is where it's not a hard and fast rule, but they really want the parties to take this seriously. This goal shall not be accomplished either by directly or indirectly by the party's imposition of mandatory quotas at any level. So it's not a mandatory quota that you have to adhere to, but you have to make a good faith effort to achieve these goals. Also on Rule 6 on the next slide, priority of consideration shall be given to the aforementioned groups in the selection of each state's at-large delegation. So as I was saying earlier, first you have the selection at the congressional district level. If there are any deficiencies in your allocation of delegates amongst the various identity groups, the at-large delegates should be used to complete those so that you have a balanced delegation. Also, it shall provide for equal division between men and women, and this is the new aspect this time. Gender non-binary delegates shall not be counted as either male or female. So if you've got 5 people that are non-binary and you have 75 delegates, that means that the 70 delegates have to be evenly split between male and female, and you have 5 non-binary. Rule 7. This is a little bit more about who should be included. So Rule 7 says you also need representation from the LGBTQ plus community, people with disabilities, and youth. And so the affirmative action plan should calculate what the expected percentage of people with these identities should be. So we know if we're hitting the goals or not. Betsy, do we have any questions on the line yet?
Well, Kevin Bell asked about, isn't Oregon going to gain a new congressional district in 2020? So I guess my question is, does that impact this process?
I don't think the timeline is for 2020. I think if we get one, it would be in 2022 because they have to take the census, which I believe occurs next year. And then once the population of the United States is determined, then they figure out how many representatives are from each state. So I think it'll be 2022 before Oregon will see another congressional district if we are eligible to receive one. Anything else?
That's the only question.
Okay. Hey, Kevin, good morning. Rule 8 is about apportionment. So apportionment of district level delegates within states shall be based on one of 4 formulas. And the one that we will probably follow is we will get 75% of our allocated delegates elected at the district level, 25% elected at the at-large level. So these are the ones that are intended to be used to pick up any deficiencies you have in your categories. And then 15% must qualify as party leader elected official. And I believe I have a definition of what those are. But in case I don't, I'll just say it now. So a party leader or elected official, I do talk about this. I'm going to hold off on that. Rule 9 talks about automatic delegates, and these are also known as unpledged or superdelegates. What unpledged means is when you have the primaries, you have most delegates that go to the convention have pledged to support a candidate. So, it looks like we're going to have, like Joe Biden and Beto O'Rourke and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and maybe a couple of others. So when we go into the district level elections, delegates will have pledged themselves to one of those candidates, and then that delegation will select who will represent them at the convention. And they are bound to their vote. So if I run as a Bernie Sanders delegate in the district level and I get elected, then I am bound to cast my first vote for Bernie Sanders. If no one, and so that's what a pledged vote is. I am pledged to vote for Bernie Sanders. The unpledged people are individuals like the state party leaders and the Democratic National Committee members that each state elects. Those are unpledged. So they have not pledged to anyone in particular, and they can actually decide, I believe, during the convention who they support. They do not get to vote on the first round. So that was one of the results from the Unity Commission study, that the unpledged delegates do not vote on the first round. So the first vote will be relatively pure in terms of who receives votes on the convention floor. If no candidate receives 50%, that's when they go to a round two. What's interesting about round two is that all of the delegates are then released from their pledges, and all the superdelegates get to vote. And so the second round starts to get very interesting if we go there on who ends up getting selected by at the convention floor. So yes.
All right, now the audience can hear me. This is an issue that I get a lot of people asking about in social media, is what the power of that second vote is and the likelihood that they basically just take the establishment candidate and that all this effort really doesn't freaking matter. All right. So can you weigh in on that? And, it
all depends on who gets elected as delegates to the convention. So if you saw the show that we did 2 weeks ago, we talked about the convention being the ultimate deciding body of the Democratic Party, and it only convenes once every 4 years. But that is it. That when you are a delegate to the national convention, you are a decision maker on what happens at the Democratic Party. So if we get a bunch of Dem exit people who say that the Democratic Party is worthless and we're not going to participate, and they let all establishment people vote, then yes, that's what you're going to end up with. If people decide that they're Democrats and they're going to take back their party, then it could be a very different situation. All of the delegates to the convention are elected in should be elected in fair and open elections. And that's why we're going through the rules today, so that you can understand what the rules are and you can demand your rights. And so it's really who they vote for on the second. If there is no one who receives a majority on the first round, then it who gets a majority at the subsequent rounds of voting will become the candidate for the Democratic Party.
Right. Okay. But the people we choose are people that we can select at the state level at the max. The super Ds are mostly anointed ones, 1%ers, rich people, right? Just kind of people that have been around that we don't have control over that unless we vote them out in some particular election, right?
According to the rules, and I didn't find any wiggle room in this, the superdelegates have been tightened down, and they are also elected people. So they're like current governors. So like our governor will be a superdelegate, Kate Brown. She's been elected by the people. There's a bunch of delegates who are things like chair of the National Association of Attorney Generals, which is what Ellen Rosenblum is. She's also an unpledged delegate. But they don't get a vote on the first round. They get to vote on the second round. But all of these people should be elected. 8 years or 10 years ago on the 2012 convention, we did run into some people who were delegates by virtue of making large contributions. I don't see room in the delegate selection plan for that to occur this time.
All right. Well, that's reassuring. Thanks.
Hopefully everyone follows the rules.
Yeah. It's not a question for me. It's more of a comment. Isn't and Oslo Fabe kind of brings up, they're saturating the field of candidates in key states to force a second round. Isn't that really going to be one of our major struggles, is going to ensure that, there's a candidate that walks in there that has enough pledged delegates to win on the first round?
It is what it is. There's a number of states that have moved their primaries up, and so by the time Oregon gets to, so if you're one of the early ones, lucky you get a broader choice of candidates to vote for. It would be very interesting if there was a broad distribution of votes, and we ended up with 3 or more candidates to choose from once the convention occurs. It just depends on how people vote.
Charlotte Brandt had a question. When was the last time it went to a second vote at the convention?
I believe in the Democratic Party it was 68, but right. I wouldn't bet my life on that because my memory is old and failing. It's been a long time.
I think you're right. It was 1968.
That's encouraging. That went well.
That was it's amazing.
The precursor? It was what the precursor was to that.
The Democrats always have exciting conventions.
And Bobby Kennedy. There's a question by the Progressive Update. Do you know how similar the rules would be for New Jersey? We follow the national platform.
The rules that I'm going through today are issued by the National Democratic Party, and they are instructions to the states for crafting the implementation plans of these rules. So the rules I'm going through today should apply to all 50 states.
Those are the only questions. Thanks.
Cool. Let's go to Rule 10 on the next slide. So there's this category called pledged party leaders, and they want 15% of the delegation to be these people. And so what they are defined are as, loosely apparently, big city Democratic mayors. Now, I don't know what qualifies as a big city. I would assume that Astoria is not a big city, but is Portland a big city? It's a quasi big city, but I think they allow the states then to define what qualifies. Statewide elected officials, we actually did not have any statewide elected officials run for these positions in Oregon 6 years ago. Statewide legislative leaders, state legislators, and other state, county, and local elected officials and party leaders. So it's this third category, and it's a very low level. So someone from Clatsop County ran as a director of a soil and water conservation district board member, and the party allowed them to qualify. So if you are a elected official, then you can run for one of these slots at either of the two conventions. And unlike, the way it happened in 2016 was that these were actually special set-aside elections for these. They were separate. So they were not treated like the identity groups were, which were more aspirational. These were, we made sure that we had people elected from this category. So Oregon treated that as more of a hard category than an aspirational category.
So, Larry, there was a question that about Dawn St. Clair. As Oregon State legislators seriously considering moving primary up to Super Tuesday to join the Californias? Yes.
I've heard that. That it was being discussed, but the last time I looked through the bills that have been brought for consideration, I didn't see one, so I'm unaware of it. But if anyone else is aware, please let us know and we can talk about it. As far as I know, ours is still in May. One of the good things about being in May is that we get bonus delegates, and that states that move their primaries up earlier get penalized delegates. So we will have more of a delegation and more of a say than we would otherwise. Rule 11 is about what I was talking about earlier, the at-large delegate selection. So this is used to achieve gender balance and identity goals and shall be allocated according to the statewide primary vote. Excuse me. And this one is interesting, and it could apply to Oregon, because if we remain later, if a presidential candidate is entitled to an allocation under this rule is no longer a candidate at the time at-large delegates are selected, their allocation shall be proportionally divided amongst the remaining candidates. I think what this means is that if I am a Beto O'Rourke candidate, pledged candidate, but he ends up not getting enough votes in the Oregon primary, like less than 15%, to qualify, then my vote is allocated elsewhere. Rule 13, this just states that you have to state your presidential preference so they know how you're going to be voting on the first round. Rule 14, fair reflection of presidential preference. States shall allocate district-level delegates and alternates in proportion to the percentage of the primary or caucus vote won in that district by each preference. And this is where it states that candidates receiving less than 50% shall not be awarded delegates. So what this means is that if you have a situation where in the primary, candidate A gets 60% and candidate B gets 40%, and candidate C gets no votes, then 60% of the pledged delegates have to be for the candidate that receives 60% of the votes, and 40% of the delegates have to, there has to be 40% of the delegates allocated to the candidate who received 40%. This one is interesting. Rule 14, at-large and pledged party leader elected officials shall be allocated to presidential preferences also by reference to primary votes. This is about the at-large and PLEO, not unpledged delegates. So this is separate than the unpledged delegates. And this was also done in a similar way in 2016. We had, so the Soil and Water Conservation District delegate ran pledged to one of the candidates. And they elected two, I believe, at the state convention for Sanders in 2016, and they elected one for Hillary because that's how the math worked out. Rule 18 bans the unit rule and slate making. So this doesn't mean that you can't put together coalitions. What it means is that the party cannot identify on the ballots like preferred candidates. So this is how you address the situation that you were talking about earlier, John, is that the party cannot say these 10 delegates are the ones blessed by the admin committee or the executive committee of the Democratic Party of Oregon, or however. Everyone has to be listed equally on the ballot without those designations. However, as we saw in 2016, it's perfectly fair for you to go out and recruit delegates and people to attend the conventions and run a campaign just like any election. Next slide on Rule 18. Any individual or group of Democrats may sponsor or endorse a slate of candidates for convention delegates. So this is where you're allowed to express your free speech. But this is where it bans it from being identified on the ballot. Rule 19 is about alternate delegates. So the proportions of alternate delegates elected at the two sets of conventions may be the same as the proportions of delegates elected in those categories. They really should be the same proportion. I don't know why the word may was chosen, but that gives the states some wiggle room on how those can be chosen when they write the state rules. So what my advice is to all the states is find a team of individuals who will familiarize themselves with these rules and then monitor the creation of the state plan, and then monitor the administration of the state plan. Because you can have all the rules in the world, but if they're written improperly, you're screwed. And then if they're not, they could be the greatest set of rules in the world, but if they're not administered properly, then they do you no good either. Any final questions on the line, Betsy? John, any final questions?
Well, Phil Britton just dropped in.
Sorry.
That's all right. Go ahead, Betsy. You there?
I didn't unmute myself. Sorry. Phil Britton asks, who and what Democrat is pushing for ranked choice voting?
Not mentioned anywhere. And so unless a alternate method is specified, you have to go with 50%. So I'm assuming that the question is in regards to the election of delegates. It would be interesting. I believe the state could propose ranked choice voting, which would be nice. I don't recall ever having a second round of votes. Usually there is so much participation in the delegate selection conventions that you fill up your allocated number of slots with people who receive the majority. So it's only when you have slots left over from people who have not received a majority that you need those alternate voting systems. I believe the state could propose that. Any state could propose that as part of their plan. The state plans have to be given to the Democratic National Committee's Rules Committee for verification that they've adhered to the DNC guidelines. And so if they have qualms about ranked choice voting, then they would have a discussion. It wasn't banned, so it certainly could be proposed.
He also asked, why does not the Democratic Party follow Democratic Party principles and abolish their superdelegate system publicly?
There was an attempt to in 2016, and there was a strong feeling from Southern minority delegates that it was important to keep superdelegate representation so that they had a stronger voice within the party. And so it remains in the system for good reasons. It's not because the party wants to, put its thumb on the scale. As we saw with Debbie Wasserman Schultz in 2016, you can have all the rules in the world, but if the leadership of the Democratic Party wishes not to follow them, and we saw ample evidence of them not following it in the WikiLeaks emails, and no one calls them on it, then they can get away with it. Finally, the uproar was so great that she stepped down at the beginning of the convention, if you remember, and then Donna Brazile stepped in as interim chair until they had the election where we got Tom Perez.
Such an improvement.
Any other questions?
No, I think that's all the questions there are.
Cool. I thought I had a slide in here on where to find these documents. So I attached the documents to advancementofdemocracy.org under reference documents. So I have the call for the convention, the delegate selection plan, another document, the DNC bylaws and rules, and then for those in Oregon, I also linked the bylaws and standing rules of the Democratic Party of Oregon. You can also find your state's bylaws and rules and see if they've built in anything inside those rules that govern the delegate selection process. So that's at advancementofdemocracy.org. Under the reference documents tab, just click on the button and you can see where all of these rules are laid out in black and white. So for our final segment today, we have an update from Ethan and Amanda on the Oregon Poor People's Campaign. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi,
Thanks for
how's
having
it going?
us.
Well, thank you for joining us on this Sunday morning. So give us an update on what's been happening with the Poor People's Campaign.
Yeah, totally. So the Poor People's Campaign is a national moral movement that was started back in 1968 by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Transitioning out of the civil rights movement, he was really profoundly impacted by some women organizers from the National Welfare Rights Organization. And they really brought to his attention this idea of a fusion style of organizing for the betterment of human rights in the United States. So they took influences and connections in different organizational partners from areas regarding poverty and militarization and systemic racism, and that sort of spawned this Poor People's Campaign movement back in 1968. But with the assassination of Dr. King, the movement sort of fizzled out. Up until about 2017 or 2018, we're seeing a revival of this campaign, chaired by Reverend William Barber III and Reverend Liz Theo-Harris out of the East Coast. So we're seeing that thousands of people across the country are feeling the need for a revival of a moral movement. So we've put out a moral audit. It's called the Souls of Poor People, and it's on the Poor People's Campaign's website. And it takes an inventory of where the United States is at in humanitarian, poverty, demilitarization, environmental issues, and systemic racism, and really puts that under the microscope and says, okay, what can we do better? We need to do better. What can we do better? This movement is built still in the built in the tradition of the original Poor People's Campaign movement. Lots of songs, nonviolence, civil disobedience, direct action, and really holding our poor and impacted people at the center of it, and making sure that we hand the mic off to them as opposed to us speaking on their behalf. So that's just a little brief history of the campaign. Amanda, any updates on the bus tour?
You're muted, Amanda.
Yep, I got it. Yeah, we're hitting the road next weekend as part of the Poverty and Truth tours that are happening in more than 30 states in the next couple of weeks. And they're looking like a variety of things across the country. Folks are hopping in buses and vans and public transportation, and we're traveling across the states to hear each other's stories and to begin to make connections with each other and with organizations that haven't been made in the past. And so in Oregon, we will be on our Truth and Poverty tour next weekend. We'll be leaving from Portland, where we'll talk a little bit about urban. We'll be doing a couple of site visits with houseless communities, talking about poverty and housing in urban areas. And then we will be traveling to the southern part of the state, where on next Saturday night, we will be holing up at Camp Myrtlewood in Myrtle Point in Coos County to do our first southern part of the state orientation. There will be a big meal and orientation of the campaign. So folks will be spending the night. So there will be songs and some campaign building happening on Saturday night in Myrtle Point. And then on Sunday, we will be in Roseburg, also talking with some houseless communities and making the connections that like our people are suffering and struggling to find housing in urban and rural parts of the state. So it's not an issue that's just plaguing one part of our state. And so we'll be hearing the stories of folks on the front lines of policy violence. And if you want to learn more about that, you can sign up on our website, poorpeoplescampaign.org. We'll send out some emails this week about how you can get connected. And if you want to join us in Myrtle Point, on Saturday evening at 5 o'clock. Send us an email and we'll get you all the information you need. We're at Oregon at poorpeoplescampaign.org.
I have a question.
Yes.
So how do you affect change? And the reason why I ask is because we do all of this work to elect alleged progressives to public office, and they get in there and they turn out to be neoliberals, where they do things like fine poor people for panhandling. The people who have the least, they impose fines on. And these are people, your art gallery hopping, white wine sipping neoliberals. They're the ones that seem to end up with the levers of power. How do you affect them to change? How do you get them to change?
Yeah, well, number one, part of our work of the campaign nationally is calling that out and naming real clearly, right, that it's policy violence when we're electing people into these positions, and that just because we're electing folks from the Democratic Party doesn't mean they're supporting poor people or enacting policy that benefits all people. So for us, that's just kind of like an unveiling of that's actually what's happening. And to be clear about the words we use when we talk about the policy violence, right? That to say what's happening in Astoria, right, which is the new policy is you can't exchange money from a vehicle to a person, I think, on the street. That's not actually about safety, right? That's about the criminalization of homelessness. So we are traveling across the state, calling out the violence for what it is. And part of what is happening in the campaign in June of this year is nationally, we'll all be gathering in DC in June for a Poor People's Congress, and we'll be launching a moral budget that puts numbers to our demands and calls our legislators to account to enacting the demands. Like, it's not an issue of do we have enough? There's plenty of money. It's about where we're spending it. And so we're having that conversation nationally. We're having it here in the state. And part of that is releasing our demands and coming up with the moral budget. It is also, we're hosting poor people's hearings across the state. So we are saying, like, we don't actually want Nike at the table determining our tax law. We want people who are impacted by the tax law. So let's get educators into those places. And so we're training media to tell the stories of those people. And we are asking our legislators to listen to the stories of poor people and the wisdom of people who are most impacted before they're listening to corporations. So for us, it looks like raising up leaders who are telling their stories and empowering folks to connect across the state in places and ways they haven't connected in the past. I would say for you all, it is like asking the questions about poverty. In 2016, there were 25 oh, my mind just totally blanked on the word. Debates, I'm sorry, 25 debates, presidential debates, and not a single question was asked about systemic poverty or systemic racism. And so we want to have that conversation, knowing that because we haven't had it, it's going to be a little messy, but we are demanding that the questions be asked and that we start to address it.
And it's just not on the shoulders of Democrats, because 2/3 of the elected officials in Oregon belong to the Republican Party, and poverty is not a partisan issue, with 63% of Americans not able to sustain a $500 emergency bill. I mean, the whole country is just on the precipice of collapsing, really, and it's not a Democratic issue. It's really everyone's issue.
Mm-hmm. It's everyone's issue for sure, but I think there is a narrative that says, like, the Democratic Party is looking out for poor people, and we're experiencing that not to be true.
The Democratic Party likes to talk about they talk about it, just like they like to talk about green energy, and they like to talk about. So yeah, it's action that you guys are getting out of them. We're trying to.
Want to talk about rent control.
Yeah.
And honestly, you know, there are 1.9 million people in Oregon who are poor and low income, and that's a lot of people to build power with, and to demand change in that conversation. So we're starting at the bottom and doing that work.
Well, you're doing awesome stuff. Appreciate your work. Is there anything else that you would like to say before we close?
Yeah, I just wanted to let everybody know how you can get connected to a movement like this. We're just a bunch of poor, regular, impacted folks doing this thing, and we can't do it alone. And the more people that we get involved, the more powerful and the greater results that we can see. So you can look us up on our Facebook page. That's Oregon PPC on Facebook. Also our website, there's the national website that has a ton of great documents, from our principles to specific policy demands, to our moral audit. And that's poorpeoplescampaign.org. And there's a section on the national website where you can type in your zip code and submit that zip code, and then you can get linked up locally. So it's just a great resource. There are a ton of great documents, and if you are in the mood to get centered and get fired up, then please follow us on Facebook or go over to our website.
Cool. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Well, there's a question. Molly Solomon wants to know how to make sure to involve indigent on all sides of the political spectrum.
We have folks from all places in this movement. And so we have found that poverty is impacting all people. So we haven't struggled for that to be the case, and it offers a place for lively debate. But we're able to say, like, the Democrats aren't acting on our behalf, and the Republicans aren't acting on our behalf either. So we're finding common ground there across the state.
That was the only question.
Okay. Well, have a great day. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys. Take care.
Bye. Receiving notices of shows. So if, we are generally broadcasting on Sunday mornings, but sometimes events prevent us from doing so. If you would like notices of upcoming shows so you don't miss them, you can receive notices by going to advancementofdemocracy.org and signing up to receive. We don't send them out randomly to people, because that's actually against the spam laws. So if you would like to know about shows, we would be glad to share you when they're coming up, and how to access the recorded shows after they've transpired. Next slide is on upcoming events. So we are in the midst of a special local election cycle right now. Last Thursday was the final day to file for office, and close on the heels of that date is March 25th, which is the due date for voters' pamphlet statements. It's really hard to get elected if you have a voters' pamphlet and you're a candidate and you don't get your information. It's the cheapest way to make the public aware of your candidacy. So make sure that you get a well-done photograph, because we live in a society that goes on visuals. They want a picture of you that looks like they're someone that they can trust, and then get your voter statement in the pamphlet, and that'll at least make it an even playing field for you. April 30th is the voter registration deadline. May 1st is when ballots will be mailed, so it's just 5 weeks away. For those of you who are Democrats in Oregon, May 18th and 19th is the second quarter state central committee meeting. So by then we should have all the standing committee chairs appointed, and the organization start gearing up for 2020. May 21st is the local election here in Oregon. And then August 11th is the third quarter state central committee meeting. So that's as far as the upcoming events go.
Larry, there's a question from Osla Fave. What do you think we the people should do if the establishment elites, DNC, attempts to cheat in the presidential primary again?
That's why we have to watch out for who gets selected as delegates. The guidelines from the DNC are aspirational, but they are only as good as they have been adhered to. So all people in all 50 states have to monitor the activities. Hopefully you've elected ethical leadership and they're going to carry out stuff so that democracy is served. But, you know, going back to Ronald Reagan's famous dictum, trust but verify. Make sure that the stuff they are doing is according to the rules, and that they have written party rules that don't allow wiggle room for them to control things that are undemocratic. Unfortunately, democracy requires constant vigilance, and that's the price we pay.
Martha May Bryson actually is someone I know and I'm working on with something about an event announcement. She and I and some other folks in Douglas County has actually started a nonprofit called Housing First Umpqua, which is going to push for immediate assistance for folks who are homeless here, but also to push for public policy change to focus on making our government responsible for getting people housed. And we're having a public meeting tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m. at our local housing authority's community center in Roseburg. So there you go. So there's a couple of questions. What about the news that the Democratic National Committee is going to cut off any company helping someone run against an incumbent? Solomon asked that.
So that was one of the campaign organizations that are affiliated with the Democratic Party. This is a practice that is so abhorrent. It makes me sputter. We find that here in Oregon. We had a candidate who wanted to run for the legislature in 2018. He went to one of the big campaign firms, and they said, "Well, there's two things you're going to need for us to represent you. We're going to need $120,000, and then we're going to have to get permission to represent you from Salem." And Salem, of course, is the code word for the Democratic Party structure. And I believe they came back and they said, "No, we were told that we can't represent you." So we need campaign management firms that are not beholden to the establishment to represent people. This is, running a campaign is not something that comes naturally to anyone, and there's actual, things you have to do to be a successful candidate unless you have just extraordinary powers of persuasion. You need help in running a campaign. And so that's why we established the Solidarity Campaign Management Company in 2016 or 2018 to support candidates who are rejected by the establishment. You got to make capitalism work here. It doesn't do any good to complain about it. You have to take money. Money is the only thing that anyone seems to understand. And if you take money away from them, then they get it. There's my tirade.
Oz LaFave asked, did the DPO elect an ethical chair?
I believe so. It's not a quantum leap in progressiveness, but the chair that we elected is better than the previous chair. I believe that she will be more fair-minded, and I think she understands that if she wants a happy term in office, that she needs to treat everyone equally and fairly, and it's my expectation that she will do so.
I think that's for the questions.
Okay, well, that's our show today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Again, if you have any questions or want to join, you can go back to the links at the beginning of the show. We would love to hear from you and make 2020 a success.
Hey, Larry. So
yes,
I see Carol's in here. Are we looking for updates on the Bernie rally, or was that for later or for some other time?
That's for the Bernie update, which we're recording next.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. We're just working the shows out live.
Well, I think that she was asking about an announcement about the burn storm that's happening next Saturday in Eugene.
Carol, you.
Hello there. Yes, I was enjoying the show and thought maybe I could also let you know that we were celebrating here in Lane County next Saturday. We're very excited, and so we have a lot of activity going and a lot of energy, so I'll share that with you when you are ready.
All right. Thanks, Carol.
You're welcome.
That's great.
Actually, I think it was Charlotte Brandt who asked the question. Sorry.
That's all right. We're glad to
Got
see you.
the names wrong.
So
But anyway, you answered it. They're doing one on Saturday.
And we're creating a video in the next hour. And if you'd like to see that video, it'll be posted on OregonForBernie.org.
We'll be doing it really quick because we also have the live stream of Bernie coming up. So there you go. All right, Larry, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody in the audience. Anything else? We out of here?
We're out of here.
We're out of here. We're getting out of here with, hang on, everybody. You know this. Here, it's a cover. This is the Poor People's Campaign song, or a song. It's I Am Not Afraid, Poor People's Campaign. This is really cool. So, second here.
I am not afraid. I am not afraid. I will die for liberation, 'cause I know why I was made. I am not afraid. I am not afraid. I will die for liberation, 'cause I know why I was made. I am not afraid.
Thanks, Molly.